Hi, thank you guys very, very much for having me on. I really appreciate the invitation. Let me get my screen up here so everybody can see the presentation and follow along. Let's see, can everybody see that okay?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So the topic that I'm going to be discussing today is NFTs, and something that I hope to accomplish with this is maybe demystify NFTs as an idea to a lot of people. I think the general public perception of NFTs is actually pretty narrow um, when looking at the overall landscape and potential of the technology and just decentralized tech in general, blockchain tech, cryptocurrencies, things like that. I'm very excited to have an opportunity to discuss that with folks today. I'm Joe. My name is Joe Thornton. I work at a nonprofit called Fight for the Future. Day to day, I'm a video producer there, but I am involved in a lot of different campaigns and issue areas throughout the organization. And one of my main focuses is cryptocurrency, NFTs, and decentralized tech. As I said before, I'm here to discuss NFTs specifically, though. Fight for the Future is a digital rights nonprofit. We've been involved in a number of different campaigns regarding copyright law, net neutrality, and a more open internet, more transparency in government, things like that. This is an example of a fairly recent campaign that we did that I was very involved in called Don't Kill Crypto. There was a provision in the infrastructure bill that actually passed recently that would have had really negative effects on reporting requirements for non like bank entities within the cryptocurrency ecosystem. That was going to that would have forced regular people to conduct surveillance on customers and users of decentralized services that they probably wouldn't have been able to access anyway. We were able to place over 41,000 calls to senators and representatives. And yeah, we made a lot of noise on that issue area for quite a while on that. This is an example of some of the copyright work that we do. This is called No COVID-19 in Our Name. And it was a campaign that was urging the United States government to, encourage pharmaceutical companies to share patent information with other countries so that people can easily produce COVID-19 vaccines. Believe it or not, intellectual property was a huge block in that effort. And these are the kind of things that we try to fight for, things that are changing the narrative around intellectual property to benefit social good. At Fight for the Future, we help people build power to create change and directly pressure legislators and corporations. We organize many different communities, often those more in the margins. And we believe that distributed technology has the potential to democratize the power of the internet and make people more powerful on an individual level. Before I get into why I think NFTs can be a generational leap in intellectual property, but also like digital content distribution, I need to back up a little bit and explain the current content distribution methods that are used by major corporations. So I'm going to go over some potential issues with the way that it's being conducted currently. So just to start off, when you buy, let's say, and this applies across the board for all digital content. So when I say when you buy a movie from iTunes, it could be a game from Steam, it could be a book on Kindle, it doesn't matter. If you're buying some form of digital content on a major platform, something that's very important to understand is that you're not actually buying the content itself. What you're doing is you're entering a contractual agreement between you and the company that runs the platform, that they are obligated to provide you that content on a rolling basis. So you actually just have a license to access that content. And there are a number of scenarios where you can, and many people have, easily lost access to that content. There was a situation a few years ago where something around $25,000 worth of content in someone's account was deleted in iTunes. I honestly don't know exactly what happened or why they were banned from the service, but for a number of reasons, that content can disappear. There are also scenarios where, if there is some sort of a hardware failure or human error, there have been large swaths of data that have been lost. MySpace is not exactly a digital content distributor in the way that I'm talking about, but they're a very good example where they lost probably a decade's worth of MySpace music on some erroneous update to their software. Wiped out, gone forever. There are a number of other scenarios where say you get removed from the service for whatever reason, and this could, mind you, be because of political speech or something like that, or if the company no longer exists, your access to the content is completely gone. So really, when you're buying that stuff, you're buying a license. You're not buying the movie, the song, the game. And another thing that's really important to understand is that these corporate platforms are universally exploiting creators. The industry average for the ratio that these platforms take is 30%. There's been some noise about this recently, especially with Apple versus Epic. And Epic, I believe, has reduced their ratio to 15%. But as you'll find, as we go deeper into the details of how decentralized platforms, cryptocurrency, and NFTs work, that ratio of profit taking just would be non-existent on a better platform. Creators on these platforms are also vulnerable to corporate and state censorship. This happened during the Hong Kong protests in the Apple App Store. Companies, especially large ones like Apple that are operating in a number of different countries, are very sensitive to government encouragement to censor. And they, as far as I've been able to tell, very rarely say no, especially if the government is threatening to cut them off from a very lucrative market. And like I said, during the Hong Kong protests, there was an app that assisted in organizing that Apple, not the Chinese government, removed from the App Store. So when you are relying on platforms, you are relying on them to have your back. And generally speaking, and especially when it's being pressured by a state, they will not have your back. And to just reiterate, the kind of platforms that I'm talking about here that are affected by what I'm discussing are things like Kindle, iTunes, Steam, iOS, Android, the Epic Game Store. If you purchase movies or song or albums on Amazon in digital form, all of this counts. Oh, and the Kindle thing is reminding me, another way that you can lose content on these platforms is if, for whatever reason, the company that's hosting the platform loses the rights to distribute that content. And there was a time at Amazon actually where they lost the right to distribute in 1984 and began deleting the book from people's Kindles without asking them or telling them that it was happening. So a lot of this stuff has happened before. It's not speculation, it's just historic accuracy. So here I present NFTs as a solution. And like I said, I hope to demystify NFTs as a technology because like I said, I feel like the public perception of how they work and what they are is actually quite narrow. So what can an NFT be? Just to start it off, NFTs are more than $2.5 million JPEGs. That's very clicky and headline catching, but it's not really the whole picture. Yes, it happens. Grimes sold an NFT for 2.5 million, but that's not really what I'm talking about when I'm talking about NFTs. That this is a very primitive, rudimentary form of what the technology could be. NFTs can be anything from movies, albums, songs, books, visual art, like what we were just looking at, video games. And this is a very particular topic of interest to me, but in-game items, locations, and game functions can also be NFTs. And I think it's a very cool idea. It makes items feel more permanent and have more consequence. Apps and software can also be issued as NFTs. The distribution is the first thing that I'll cover. That NFTs, I think, are a significant improvement from legacy content distribution systems. NFTs allow creators to sell their content directly to fans with no intermediaries. If you are an artist working on music or movies or whatever, you have the ability to put up a page with links to your content, sell that content directly to people that are interested in it. You don't need to go through a payment intermediary like PayPal or through credit card processors, so there's no fee there. You're going directly through cryptocurrency, so it's a transfer of value from one person to another directly through a blockchain. And then you also don't need to rely on intermediaries to platform your content, to aggregate your content. I do believe that at a certain point, people will develop open source applications that can aggregate NFTs, but realistically, like right now, people are able to issue and sell stuff directly. But there's nothing stopping some sort of a decentralized aggregator from popping up. The issue I was talking about earlier with licensing constraints, human error, hardware error, or bankruptcy of companies leading to content disappearing from the internet and disappearing from your library doesn't happen in this scenario, because when issuing an NFT, that content would be hosted on something like IPFS or Filecoin. And these are permanent decentralized file storage solutions. And this also addresses the issue of government and corporate censorship, because once you have something in a service like this, there is no single individual or group of people that would ever be capable of removing that content from the internet. So if you buy some sort of content that is an NFT and hosted on decentralized file storage, you can rest easy that your content will be permanently available to you. This is a big one. This is a big topic for me personally, for the organization personally, but I really believe that NFTs are capable of solving some pretty serious intellectual property issues that we've been dealing with for a very long time, since Napster. NFTs have the potential to streamline the copyright process, or the intellectual property issue. The reality of NFTs and a possible misframing of them that people don't understand is that NFTs are actually a form of smart contract. So you can add conditional things to your NFT in order to grant permission to remix, reuse, sample, things like that by default. You can grant permission by default for all of that kind of stuff. And it can go even deeper where, and this doesn't exist, this is just speculation, but something that could happen is you could see people issuing an album or a song where the artist has broken down all of the elements of the song, the guitar, the drums, the keyboard, the voice, all of that into individual tracks, and has pre-programmed into the NFT. If you take any of these elements and issue your own NFT based on this and reference it, and then sell that content, we will share profits in an automated way where the artist just defines how they want their content to be shared, and the crypto network, the blockchain, the instructions that you've left attached to the NFT would define how users are able to interact with that content, sell that content, and how the profit for that content would be shared. I think that can apply to any form of digital content too. So it doesn't just have to be music, it could be film, it could be literature. So I'm talking about like, fan fiction, things like that. You can automate the intellectual property process directly into the object itself. And to explain smart contracts, they're software that's given a set of instructions for how to behave in relation to an event that occurs on the blockchain. So that kind of remixing that I'm talking about would be the event that would trigger the conditions. And then profits. When creators are selling directly to fans, they get to keep all of the profits from their work. The only thing that they're going to lose is the money for the transaction fee, which on all of the major smart contract platforms or NFT platforms is quite small. And they can speak their mind on issues, important issues, because when you have the files up on decentralized storage solutions, nobody is able to take that down, even the most powerful world governments. So overall, selling content as an NFT is a much better deal for users and creators. And I believe that the savings that the creators would get on this type of distribution platform would be extended to users. And some content that's direct from creator to fan would end up being less expensive in that respect. Now, all of this said, of course, there are still environmental concerns surrounding cryptocurrency, surrounding NFTs and all of this stuff. But there are many different groups that are working on solutions currently, and a lot of the blockchains that are currently doing NFTs, Cardano and Solana, for example, actually don't use that much energy. Ethereum is the big one, and Ethereum is the one that uses a lot of energy, and even that will shortly be reducing its energy burden when they introduce staking, which the other ones that I mentioned already have. And that's just a lower energy way to process all this information. So my final thoughts are this. NFTs are in their early days, and some very basic implementations are all that we have available as examples. But there is more on the horizon, and I think it's much more exciting than multi-million-dollar JPEG files. I think people will actually start being able to make some very interesting content, some very interactive content, some very inclusive content that allows sharing of ideas and collaboration, which is significantly better than what we've had. And another thing that I'm noticing is that there's a lot of opposition coming from a place of misunderstanding, and this is coming from the public, this is coming from the government. Like I mentioned with my campaign that I was working on with the infrastructure bill, the people that are writing laws that are affecting cryptocurrency, in my experience, often don't really completely understand what the technology is. They understand that it's formidable and pretty serious, but they don't really understand how it works or what its goal really is. And among the public, I think I've noticed that it really, especially NFTs, really freak people out. But I think a lot of that is not getting the whole picture, not really seeing where it's going, but just seeing where it is right now, and seeing the worst in it, rather than trying to look forward and use your imagination and understand where this tech could go. Yeah, and like I said, there is a lot of governmental resistance for sure, and I think corporations see it as a major threat because I think in some respects they do understand where I'm coming from on this, seeing that cutting out the middleman is probably very bad for business. So people like companies like Apple, companies like Steam, companies like Amazon are probably pretty freaked out by this because they probably do understand where it's going. And then governments, obviously, with their monetary systems, feel very threatened by this because national monetary systems are oftentimes used as a system of control, and the more control that is taken away from them, it really freaks them out, understandably so. But honestly, the result of this would be a lot better than what's going on right now, in my opinion. Thank you very much for having me. It's been exciting to be able to share my thoughts on this. And I look forward to your questions because I don't get to have a lot of these types of conversations in real life. So I'm excited to talk to you guys about that tonight. But that's me. That's what I've got.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Joe. It's a great presentation and really touched on how creators can use NFTs just as another tool to get their work out and all of the pros and cons that go with that. We do have some questions from the chat. All right, so this first question here, won't NFTs encourage creators to only sell a limited number of the creations to drive the price up? How will NFTs incentivize creators to mass produce a product?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think that's one of the common misconceptions with NFTs is that they need to be one of a kind, or that there's a major incentive for them to be one of a kind. The types of, and I probably should have been more explicit about this, but I think that people can use NFTs to distribute content on a person by person basis, and the unique identifier of it would actually be used to say that John Doe owns this thing rather than this is the only version of this thing that exists. So I think that people can use NFTs as unique identifiers for individual units of copies of content.
Thanks. And yeah, another one that we got from the chat was in terms of if you could explain how one platform for NFTs would use less energy than another. I think you mentioned staking. If you wouldn't mind explaining that in some more detail.
Yeah, so the way that blockchains use a ton of energy, those blockchains, so that's Bitcoin and Ethereum are the major ones that use a lot of energy, and they're using something called proof of work, and that's highly computationally expensive. In order to mine Bitcoin and Ethereum and verify transactions, you need to push your computer through this extremely energy intensive process. That's, I think, somewhat artificial, but it's to prove that you dedicated the resources to the processing of it. That's the technique that's quite wasteful. And there is another consensus mechanism that a lot of that the majority of newer blockchains are adopting, and Ethereum is adopting as well, called proof of stake. And that is less about energy intensive processes to prove that you're dedicating resources. What you do instead is you can take a certain amount of a given cryptocurrency that's native to the network, so like Ethereum, and you can basically lock it into another wallet for a specific amount of time. So you're, instead of dedicating computational resources, you're actually parking your monetary resources for a given amount of time, and after which it's unlocked. And there are rewards for removing those from circulation. And I think part of it is that it removes the need for every single unit of the currency to constantly be assessed and counted, and it actually just like is processing stuff that network knows is happening, and it uses something like 90% less energy.
Awesome. All right. So another question we have here kind of wants some clarification on how NFTs or just like the relationship between NFTs and copyright, just like how creators are able to preserve those rights of their work.
So is the question, if someone is issuing an NFT, how can they make sure that their copyright is like enforced if they don't want people to remix or reuse or like sample the content? I'm just not sure of the question.
Yeah, I think we could probably talk about that, yeah, in relation to this question. I was just asking about the relationship between NFTs and copyright.
Yeah. So when you, and this actually makes me think of the people that are like copying and pasting JPEGs of expensive NFTs as a joke. So the way that copyright can be streamlined is when you are issuing an NFT, you can define in the smart contract how users can like use that content and how profits can be shared. So it opens up this like collaboration that is like if you want to, you can give permission to do it by default, and you can program into that content the way that the profits would be shared for it. So like you can explicitly state how you would like that content to be shared. And of course, if you don't want it to be shared at all, you don't want it to be sampled at all, you don't want it to be remixed at all, you're going to have to fall back on the old way of copyright, which is don't let anyone use it, and you have to hunt people down and give them copyright strikes and lawyer up and all of that stuff. But I'm talking about more of a utopian idea of copyright, where these are works that are being published by people who want to collaborate, and it just makes it easier. And one example that folks could look into for the spirit that I'm talking about is through Creative Commons. They're a group that has for a very long time been trying to sort of redefine how content can be made collaborative and how people can share and remix and repurpose that content. So I'm talking about something like a sort of Creative Commons that can be hard coded into the content itself.
Great. And I think just a continuation on that question, there was a little bit of a clarification in what they're asking for in terms of copyright currently, in theory, has a set time limit, whereas would NFTs be, is there anything like that for NFTs yet, or do they kind of, in theory, last forever currently?
NFTs, as far as I understand, would last forever.
All right. I have another question from the audience. As part of the infrastructure bill that just passed in the US Congress, some crypto exchanges might be subject to tax and regulations. How would this affect NFTs? Would this affect NFTs?
I think it would affect NFTs and all of cryptocurrency the same way. What the infrastructure bill is doing, and there are actually a number of things going on in cryptocurrency that are affected by the infrastructure bill. But I think what they're referring to is like a reporting requirement after $10,000 of transactions or something. Any sort of intermediary within the cryptocurrency world, from miners to exchanges, are obligated to report a ton of information on users after they have done over $10,000 in transactions. And this is like your name, your address, the public wallet address that the money was sent to, which, by the way, if you have somebody's public address on Bitcoin or Ethereum or a number of other cryptocurrencies, it actually, in effect, reveals your entire transaction history. So it's like, if you paid some random person with your credit card, and suddenly they were able to see everything that you've been doing for the last like 5 years. And the U.S. government claims that that's not their goal necessarily, but they'll have access to the information, and I suspect that they would use it. It facilitates some pretty nasty warrantless surveillance.
Gotcha. And another question from the audience here, in terms of NFTs and what we could call like facsimiles, what prevents recipients from selling facsimiles of the NFTs?
Like copies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is a super interesting concept to me. So the way that I see it is, with cryptocurrencies being such an integral part of issuing an NFT, you can, what I think will happen is artists will be able to share the public address of the wallet that minted the content itself. And it can be used as like a signature, because say you just copy and paste it and then issue a copied NFT, anybody can look at that NFT and say, no, that didn't come from so-and-so's wallet. That's not their original work. I think it's pretty straightforward. And I think, yeah, there's a lot of people worried about that, but I as far as I understand from the technology, it seems like a pretty simple solution to solve just by basically cryptographically signing your work.
All right, let's see if there's any other questions from the audience. I guess just in general, you brought up the issue of censorship, right, of like people's work. And there was a question kind of relating to just like what in marketplaces that don't have, active content moderation, I guess, what are like, what are the implications of that? Like what can be like traded on these marketplaces, and, just like as is?
Yeah. So first of all, yeah, I think you kind of mentioned this, but what's likely going to happen is people are going to be issuing NFTs just right out into the open. And ideally, the content platforms that are aggregating this stuff will be somewhat decentralized in nature. And that does, of course, lead to more varied content being published. And there probably will be stuff that people don't want to see. But what I expect to happen is, rather than having a more classic form of moderation, what I hope that we'll get to see is these aggregators will give users the ability to define the type of content that they're comfortable seeing. So it will be a sort of self-moderation in that respect. And there's just a reality that needs to be accepted, that if there is an uncensorable medium, there are going to be things said on it that people won't agree with, and that will make people very uncomfortable. And that's just something that comes with that technology. And overall, I think there will be more social good that comes out of that than bad, in my opinion. But yeah, I think it will. I hope that there will be some mechanism for people to define the type of content that they're comfortable seeing.
Gotcha. And then another audience question, could NFTs be used for money laundering?
Absolutely. Cryptocurrency can be used for money laundering. I'm sure NFTs can be used for money laundering. This is the thing, right? Like in any in anything that involves human beings, or I mean, I'm even thinking of like wild animals in nature. There's always going to be some form of deception. There's always going to be some kind of scam. It's just the nature of reality. There are scams on very legitimate platforms that exist. So yes, there will always be weirdness. There will always be dishonesty. But I think the thing to remember is that more openness is better, not less. And yes, of course, there will be money laundering with NFTs, but that's just because NFTs are actually quite empowering and allow people to do some pretty wild stuff that wasn't possible before. And these types of things just come with that.
Yeah, this is kind of tangentially related, but Adam Ruben's Everything had an episode on like fine art and how rich people sort of use fine art
Oh
as
yeah.
a way of, kind of getting out of certain like fees and taxes. So I can imagine probably that would apply to the NFT space.
Yes, and that's one of the reasons that I'm not so crazy about these like $2.5 million JPEGs and stuff. It's like the art scene that has popped up around NFTs is like the worst possible use case that could have caught fire for this technology, because like I was highlighting, there are so many like liberatory and very progressive uses of this technology, and kind of like the grossest version of it is what became extremely popular right away, and it's kind of heartbreaking.
Because they're just, NFTs are a tool just like everything else, and it'll be interesting to see how that progresses over time. So another question. So Flight for the Future does a great job of translating technical issues and breaking them down to a wider audience. In general, what is some advice for those of us who also want to help spread important issues with friends and family who might not be as privy to internet lingo, or how these issues are relevant to their lives?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think analogies are incredibly useful, and I use stuff like that when talking to family members and people that I know that aren't that don't like care about technology as much as I do. So trying to understand parts of their life that could be concretely made better through any type of technology that you're trying to describe to them would be helpful. Using their whatever situation they're going through that you think that the technology could help them with as an example. And also just like being patient with people. Like I've, it's okay to take your time, and it's also like okay if they don't get it. There are just some things like that people don't have. Like I grew up using computers like from a very young age, and my parents didn't use computers probably until they were in like their 40s or so. And so I try to remember that they didn't like their brain wasn't developing around this technology. They already have their techniques and solutions and things like that, and a lot of them don't involve the internet or computers at all. So when they have trouble decoding some of the things I'm trying to describe, I do try to just like accept defeat sometimes with some of my family. But yeah, just like trying to make it relate to them, trying to find out what things in their life can be solved by these technologies is a good place to start.
Thanks for that. Yeah, and another question too is you've kind of mentioned the folks who you think are not doing NFTs the way that are maybe the best for the world. Do you have any recommendations for people or organizations we can follow who are doing NFTs and this stuff in a way that you're arguing for here?
Honestly, there aren't a lot of groups that are doing the type of NFT content that I'm talking about. The reason I'm bringing it up is because of the huge swarm of the like crypto art community. I think it's kind of a huge distraction right now, and it's giving off a really weird vibe. And I guess what I would say is if you're a musician, if you're a filmmaker, if you're an author, look into the technology and investigate ways that you can publish that content as an NFT. And like I said before, and I don't think I stressed enough, I'm not talking about when I talk about the type of content distribution, I'm not talking about one of a kind, one-off items. I'm talking about using the NFT system as a way to issue unique units of an item to an unlimited number of people. You could set it to be unlimited if you wanted. So just using it as a publishing platform that doesn't require any intermediaries, I think would be extremely revolutionary. But unfortunately, I can't really point to any currently existing projects that are as robust as what I was talking about. There was one that kind of, I think it was online for just a number of hours, and they got swarmed by a bunch of people that were very anti-NFT, and I believe it was called Realms of Ruin. I hope that they relaunch, but they were a collaborative fiction project. It was a group of authors who wrote like fantasy literature, and their vision was to launch a literary platform where they would start off by each publishing a few books, but then they were going to open it up to their fans to contribute to this shared literary universe by writing fan fiction. And it was utilizing the mechanisms that I was talking about for profit sharing and explicit permission to remix and reproduce content. So it was basically going to be like a social network that was a shared fantasy universe that an unlimited number of authors were going to be able to participate in and develop together. But unfortunately, there was a lot of backlash and pressure for them to close it down. And as far as I know, it hasn't reopened. But if you want to like kind of learn about a project that has the potential of what I was talking about, Realms of Ruin is a really good example. And I guess if it sounds like something you'd be interested in, I would encourage you to reach out to the group that tried to launch it and encourage them to put it back online, because I think it was an excellent idea.
Thank you for that. Let's see if there's any more audience questions.
Really good questions. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, very engaged audience tonight. I guess just something that I was thinking about, this is kind of more just like a philosophical topic, but like, how does, I guess, like when you think about things that are like kind of like moments in time, like I think I saw something about like somebody selling like NBA Top Shots, like those moments, like as NFTs. I guess I'm curious, like how like do we as a society like determine like what sort of value those types of things have, and like outside of like the the creative space, like we're just talking about like just like those types of like things, like how do we like decide like what's that worth?
Like how does the NBA Top Shots like thing come to the decision that like a basketball card is worth X amount of dollars?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah,
I'm just curious about your input.
In a literal sense, I think that there is like these prices are often pushed up through bidding wars. These things are sold in like an auction house type environment. So they'll have opening bids, and then they'll have people coming in and challenging each other back and forth for hours and hours and hours. And it really is just like a big social experiment. They're worth what they're worth because there's one of them and someone's willing to pay more than you, and then you're willing to pay more than them, and you go back and forth, and suddenly you own a $2.5 million JPEG, and everyone thinks NFTs are nuts. Yeah, it's really just like hysteria in a way.
Along those lines, going back to the Realms of Ruin project, someone in the comments was asking, what was the why was there that backlash that kind of brought the project down? Like, where did that come from? And I guess how would they avoid that in the future?
So I don't think that they were expecting it. The whole thing is like kind of tragic, honestly. So I think what happened was they announced that the project was happening. And online, and particularly on Twitter, there really is there's a negative perception of NFTs. And I think people have like an apocalyptic negative perception of NFTs, and that they think and it, of course, the technology could be more eco-friendly. A lot of companies are already there, and the major ones are very, very close to being eco-friendly. But they announced that the project was launching. They gave details. They mentioned that it was, based on NFTs, so they were going to be publishing these stories as NFTs with like, permission for people to remix and sample and all that kind of thing. And I think that I think that the backlash for launching a project that involved NFTs was so fierce on Twitter, that they decided to turn around and cancel the project. And as far as I know, I think, some of the people that were working on it felt like they were in like mortal danger, like people were threatening them and stuff. So there was a very immediate and very strong backlash on social media directed at that project. And I figured it's just not worth it. I'm going to live my life. The project's over. I'd rather not deal with this because I'm trying to have fun. I'm not trying to like fight a war here. So I'm just going to keep writing the normal way and move on with my life. I haven't spoken with them, but we have been in touch with them a little bit. I'm not the one that's been messaging back and forth with them, but as far as I know, they were pretty freaked out. And I just thought it wasn't worth the trouble.
Thanks for that.
That is really interesting.
Yeah, it's a super, super weird story.
All right. Well, we have about 1 more minute. If there's any last audience questions, go ahead and get those in right now. Time for like 1 more. Let's give it a second. All right. Well, hearing none. Joe, thank you so much for your presentation. It was really informative and it gives us something to think about as far as the future of NFTs. All right. So it is 8 o'clock right now. So we're going to head into our post-presentation Zoom call. You can go ahead and head over to that link on the screen. It'll also be dropped in the chat. And again, at that space, our code of conduct applies. We'll start out with some introductions, some announcements, and then go into our breakout group pitches. All right, so I don't think there's anything else. So all that's left is for us to say our catchphrase. Try on 3. 1, 2, 3. Go forth and hack. Thanks.